Hi everyone, this is just a quick video taking you through question 5 of the English language paper, Writers' Viewpoints and Perspectives. Now this is going to be really important because this year we're 100% going to be having a look at an article for question 5. So what we're going to look at in this video is just how to write a high level article and how to reflect on your response. So what we're going to do, we're going to focus on a mock question and I'm going to go through it bit by bit to help you plan and structure your argument so that we can all get a high response for this question. So before we get into this, let's just do a quick recap about question 5 and the kind of things you need to be aware about. So in the 2022 English Language Paper 2 assessment, you will 100% be writing an article. You will need to be able to express your viewpoint on a specific topic or theme. Now, a good thing to remember that this topic or theme is going to be the same thing you would have looked at in section A of this exam paper. So it's a good idea to have a look through the extract as well, just to get a few ideas because it is going to be on a similar kind of topic and subject as well. Use a range of language techniques to express your ideas. If you're not too sure what we mean when we talk about language techniques, you might have heard an acronym such as DeForest techniques or Go Massive techniques. That's a really good thing to help you remember these. If you're not too sure, please do check out our other videos on article writing that go into that in a bit more detail. Now, in order to get a decent mark, we're going to aim to write 5 paragraphs. It might be that timing might be a bit of an issue for you. So you might not be able to get 5 paragraphs, maybe you get 4 paragraphs and that's fine. But you should always try to aim to get 5 because this question is worth 40 marks. So we want to make sure that we're writing the absolute right amount for this question to make sure we get the best opportunity available. You need to spend 45 minutes writing your response. So if timing is an issue, a lot of teachers do advise you to start on question 5 first, and that way you make sure that you've had a go at the biggest question first. You don't leave it into the last minute or mix up your timing, which does happen, especially in exam style situations. So what is the marks awarded for? Now, when you actually get your exam paper, it should say that there are 24 marks for the content and organisation. Now, this in itself can seem a little bit confusing, so let's just think about what it means now. So really, when we talk about the content, we mean what have you actually included in your response. So a lot of people think that you can just waffle in this response, and it's absolutely not the case. You need to think carefully about what you're trying to say and communicate your ideas effectively by using some appropriate techniques. When we think about the organisation, we mean have you used a variety of sentence structures? Have you thought about using paragraphs if you are writing an article? A real good thing that you need to include is using headline and subheadings as well. And these are really helpful because they can help break down our writing as well. You also get 16 marks for technical accuracy. This means that you need to be very aware of your spelling, your punctuation and your grammar. Now, if you think about this question, the question is worth 40 marks. So the fact that you get 16 for SPAG probably wouldn't get a lot of people that concerned. However, when you think about both paper 1 and paper 2 combined, you have 2 questions that focus on your technical accuracy. So that is 2 lots of 16 marks across both papers. So a total of 32 marks for all of the English language just based on your ability to check your spelling, use decent punctuation, and we mean sophisticated punctuation, and using the correct grammar as well. Now, before we move on, it's important to take into account the teacher's top tip. So what I would say when you're attempting this question is just to be mindful that the first 2 paragraphs are key to your marks for this question. And this is because it helps give the examiner a really good first impression of what grade you're going to be ending up with at the end of your response. Remember, they're going to be marking lots and lots of papers, so your start needs to be quite fantastic. It needs to use a lot of those techniques, sophisticated punctuation, spelling of more sophisticated words and decent vocabulary as well. We really want to make sure that our first 2 paragraphs really pop, jump off the page and grab the examiner's attention. Look at the exam question and attempt the challenges that follow. So the exam question we're going to be using, very typical one that you might get in a mock or in the actual exam itself, is something like this. So children these days eat too much junk food. We need to ban sweets and chocolate before it's too late. Write an article for a parenting website in which you explain your point of view in this topic. Now, the first thing I want you to do when you're faced with an exam question such as this is first of all just to think about the TAP. So what is the TAP? Whenever we say TAP, we mean the topic, the audience, and the purpose. So before you rush and start going through and start planning it, or you're really in a hurry to get started, which is great, you need to make sure that you're aware specifically of what you need to be talking about and who you're really aiming it at as well. Super challenge. I'd like to think about what kind of tone would you need for this question. Think carefully about the audience. How would you speak to this kind of audience? Are there any words or phrases, formal or informal language that you would use or maybe wouldn't use because it wouldn't create the appropriate tone? Mega challenge. What kind of methods and techniques could you use to have a positive impact on the audience? Remember that a lot of the time we're trying to persuade people towards our point of view, so you need to use the kind of techniques that are going to win people over and that are going to really convince people that what you're saying is correct. Class feedback. Check your understanding against the answers below. So if you think about the challenges that we just went through, all of these are really important and key things to be thinking about before you actually start planning or writing your response. So the first one there was the challenge. And what we had to think about was the TAP, which stood for the topic, the audience, and the purpose. So then the topic of the question is about junk food. Specifically, this is aimed at children as well. The audience, these are going to be mothers and fathers, or a more mature audience. And the purpose is to express your opinion in a clear and concise manner. Next one then, super challenge. So the response for the question will need to be calm and complimentary. So for example, you could say something like, I know that parents care deeply for their children. However, and you can see there I've used the ellipsis to do a ... I wouldn't necessarily do this in my response. I'm just showing you there that you can build on this idea. I've used the discourse marker in the word however there to say that even though I've said quite a positive thing about parents and about how they care about their children, the next thing I'm going to say might be contradictory in that, and I might say that we need to think a bit more carefully about the kind of food that we allow our children to eat. Now this is a really good thing to do because it allows us to actually butter the audience up. It makes them think that we're approaching this argument in a calm and rational way, and they're therefore going to be more likely to listen to what we have to say. Mega challenge. So in order to win over an audience, you can use things like being polite. Again, that's just a general thing that we should be doing day to day anyway, so hopefully that would be a given. Acknowledge both sides of the argument. Now, if you just blindly say that your point of view is the only one that should be considered and you're right and everyone else is wrong, you're going to appear very narrow-minded and you're not going to sound very reasonable to the audience. So if you acknowledge the other side of the argument and then counter the argument yourself with an even better reason, you not only show that you're calm and reasonable, but you also make sure that no one can really argue with your point of view. Use humour. Now I don't mean that you need to use a knock-knock joke or anything like that, but try to get them to smile. Acknowledge that parents are human beings just like anyone else, and all of us relate more to people if we can build a connection and a relationship with that person. And a good way to do that is by trying to make them laugh or smile, react in quite a humorous manner. Now what we're going to do, before we actually have a go at planning it or writing it ourselves, we're going to have a look at a typical response that was actually submitted to an examiner. Okay, so when we look through this response, what we need to think about is what mark do you think this response would achieve? And then you can try and think about it in terms of how would this compare to the kind of thing you might write yourself. So first things off, it says time to bin bad food. Junk food is really bad. It is bad and awful for your health. Parents that allow their children to eat this kind of rubbish are selfish and irresponsible. Let me get straight to the point. There is no reason to let young people eat this kind of food, and it must stop now. Unhealthy children. A report from somewhere stated that 43% of children these days have health issues due to eating fatty foods. Parents need to grow up and at their age and just say no to their children. How hard is that? Just say no. If they really cared about their children, then they would stop being stupid and selfish and put their kids' health first. Now what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to actually pause the video here. I'd like you to read through the response a bit more carefully. I'd like you to try and identify what techniques have been used. Have they used things like the correct spelling, punctuation and grammar? Have they laid it out in an appropriate way for an article? And then if you can, I'd like you to consider what kind of mark would this achieve if the candidate had carried on in this kind of style. If the writing had remained at the same kind of quality, what mark would they get overall? Class feedback. Check your answers against the examiner's comments. So now what we've got then is the same response that we just read through on the left hand side. Now this is what a real life examiner has said about this student response. So the first thing then, you might get this in your normal English lessons. So WWW stands for, very simply, what went well. So we're going to think about some of the positive aspects of this response. The first thing then, the candidate has wrote in the appropriate form for an article. Now that is going to be really important, especially this year, as we're all going to have to write an article, and we can see that they've used a headline and a subheading to organise their writing. So that's fantastic. The candidate is off to a really good start straight away. The response has used some techniques effectively. Now if you look closely at that comment, you might notice that some has actually been written in italics. And what is implied here is that yes, they have used a few techniques, which is really good. You do need to use techniques in your writing, but rather than just using some, we'd actually like more. So the positive word that we're looking for really is that they've used a range or even a judicious range of techniques. So if they've only used some techniques, it means yes, you've used some, but they haven't really used enough in order to get the highest mark possible. Next one then, EBI, so even better if. The tone is too negative for the audience. Think about the kind of words and the kind of language that's being used here. If they really cared about their children, they would stop being stupid and selfish. Those words are so negatively charged. You can't call your audience selfish and stupid or imply that they are inferior in any other way. No one's going to listen to you if you're being too negative to them. It's just not going to get the message across appropriately. A range of language techniques are needed and are needed to be used effectively. Okay, so it's actually a really important thing to point out where it says needed to be used effectively. If we have a look at that second paragraph, now the candidate has actually started off with a really good idea. So it says that they're going to talk about a report that's been made on this topic. So a report from somewhere stated that 43% of children these days have health issues due to eating fatty foods. Okay, we know that's fantastic because they've used alliteration there with fatty foods, but why haven't they stated where the report has come from? Why not just say it has come from Oxford University, from Cambridge University, somewhere that sounds like quite a sophisticated, educated source? Now it doesn't have to be true, but just saying from somewhere shows that the person doesn't really know what they're talking about and means that the technique hasn't really been used effectively as well. There are numerous spelling and grammatical errors that will affect the technical accuracy of the response. If you think about the kind of words that they're using there, some of the words are quite low level. There's some very obvious spelling mistakes. They've used the wrong there several times. Really is spelled incorrectly, and generally they're getting mixed up with this idea of homophones as well, so words that sound like certain words, but we often get them mixed up in our writing. A range of punctuation is needed for more marks. So if we look again at the response, you might be able to see there that yes, it has used full stops. It might have even used commas as well. It's even used a question mark, which is good. But in order to actually get the higher marks, we need to be using things like colons, semicolons, parentheses, all those other kind of quite difficult forms of punctuation that will get you more marks in the exam. So now we're going to move on. We're going to think about planning your response. Now, the difficulty is with the plan is that a lot of people just aren't shown how to plan effectively. And really the key to this one is just making sure you plan in a way that is helpful and beneficial to your own writing. So we've got a number of different ones that you may have used, and those are things like doing mind maps, doing spider diagrams, bullet points, and the ones I'm going to focus on today is a checklist. And the reason why I'm doing that is because it's the one that works the best for me. Now you need to find the one that works most appropriately for you. However, I have found what a lot of students do is they'll do a mind map. They might even use some really effective colours and make it look very pretty and very visually stimulating, but then they might not even come back and use it in their actual writing. So unless you're making a plan that actually is going to benefit your writing, there's really no need to do one. So you need to make sure that if you are going to do a plan, that it's actually there and it's going to help make your response more effective than without actually having one there for you. If you're struggling to start, I will go through a full plan for this question 5, and you can use all of these ideas if you do want to go ahead and start writing your own response for a bit of practice. Look at the example below and use it for your own response. So as I said in the previous part of the video, this is something that works for me. If it doesn't work for you, that's absolutely fine. You can think about your own methods of planning, but this is one idea that I'd just like to share with you to see if it is effective. So on the left hand side here, what I would do is I would write down my DeForest techniques. Now these are by no means the only techniques that I can use in my writing, but there are a real good range of ones to use just to make sure that I'm going to include at least some techniques in my response. Now what I would do is I would come up with some sentences just to come up with some ideas, and I'd use the list on the left hand side and just start ticking them off to make sure I've actually used each one of them. Now there's nothing wrong with using these techniques more than once, but if you're getting very repetitive, if let's say you've used 5 or 6 rhetorical questions, then you're not really going to help the examiner by showing them you know how to use a range of techniques. You're only showing that you know how to use that one technique over and over again. So we want to try and have a healthy range of these techniques in the ideas we're going to come up with. So on the right hand side then, I've got my draft sentences. The first one I came up with on the topic is this: I believe that it can be hard being a parent. However, now the first thing I want to think about is that obviously I'm speaking to parents, so I need to have a calm and respectful tone, especially if we're going to be talking about their children, because parents can be quite protective of their children, and rightly so. In terms of the techniques, because I've said I believe, I'm clearly stating that I'm about to come up with my own personal opinion. This is a really good one to start with as well, because it's allowing the audience to know that really I'm on their side, right? I have a lot of patience and respect for parents. I've also used the word however, so I've got this discourse marker in there as well, which allows us to actually say that yes, I have a lot of respect for parents. I understand that it's hard, but I'm also going to come up with my other argument about this topic, that maybe we don't give them the best food possible. Next one. You are presented with challenges, obstacles, and serious issues on a daily basis. Now from this one, the main technique that I've used there is a triplet or a group of 3. So I've got 3 strong reasons or 3 strong ideas towards a common goal. Next one. Who doesn't enjoy eating junk food every now and then? And you can see there that right at the end of the sentence, I've got my rhetorical question. Next one. 90% of parents are exhausted at the end of a working week. So the main one I was focusing on here is the statistics. I always try to go about 90% because 90% is very convincing. It's not too over the top. It's not like I'm saying 100% of parents are struggling all the time and it's really dramatic. But 90% is quite a reasonable statistic to present people with. I'm also using quite interesting words here like exhausted. That's quite emotive as well. I'd actually get a mark for that as well, because I'm not just using a simple word like tired or sleepy, which isn't very educated at all. I'm trying to actually broaden my vocabulary and use it in my response as well. And the final one I came up with is who can blame them for giving themselves and their family a tasty treat? So I actually have 2 techniques here. First of all, I have the rhetorical question, which is really effective because it helps the audience to think very clearly about what I'm trying to communicate. I've also used alliteration, and alliteration is when we're repeating the same letter 2 or more times, and you can see it there in the words tasty and treat. Now, these sentences aren't ones that I'm going to be married to. I don't have to use these in my response, but it just helps me flush out some of the things I could say, and it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to use them word for word. It's just getting down some ideas and making sure that at the very least I'm using some of my techniques. So if we actually have a look, I've identified 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 different deforest techniques there. So I've almost included every single one in my list already. So before I've even put pen to paper, I've made sure that my plan is going to allow me to get at least a reasonable mark because I'm using a range of intelligent language techniques in my response. Mapping out your paragraphs. Again, this is another area that people tend to neglect. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to write down paragraphs 1 to 5, not in a lot of detail. Again, we're still in the planning stage. All I'm going to do is I'm going to think about what things am I going to include in each paragraph and maybe see if I can work in a few of those sentences as well. So the first one then, your introduction. Again, the start is going to be very important because the first impression really does quite count for a lot for this question. So introduction then, give a brief overview of the topic. Remember to have a polite tone for this audience. Paragraph 1. So you can see there I've got in bold, parenting is a full-time job, and that's going to be my subheading. And I'm starting with this because I want to make sure that the audience is aware that I'm not attacking them. I'm not accusing them of mistreating their children, of giving them horrible junk food and being bad parents. Absolutely not. I'm going to butter them up first. I'm going to show them how much I respect them first, okay? So you are presented with challenges, obstacles, and serious issues on a daily basis. And you can see there that even though I'm in my playing phase, I've already got part of that paragraph already thought about thanks to the plan that I did earlier on in the video. Paragraph 2. Having a balanced diet. Again, that will be my subheading. So who doesn't enjoy eating junk food every now and again? The reason why I've chose this one for my second paragraph is because talking about a balanced diet, it allows me to say, you know what, it's okay to have a treat. And then I can start using my discourse markers like however, on the other hand, and then start talking about how these things can negatively affect them. So I'm not jumping straight in and being aggressive and saying that, you know, you need to stop doing this now, or, you know, you're harming your children or anything like that. I'm going to give them a balanced argument with this second paragraph and then ease them into my third paragraph, which is going to be a lot more steered towards what I really want to say in my writing. Paragraph 3 then. So the subheading mod I'd use for paragraph 3 is the long-term impact on health. Again, that would be the main thing that I want to focus on in this paragraph. So from my plan, from the thing I did earlier on in the video, I'm going to say, I believe that it can be hard being a parent. However, we need to put the health of our children first. So you can see there that I've had time to think about it a little bit more, and I've added a little bit extra onto that thought, just so that the paragraph has a bit more of an idea of where it wants to go in terms of what we're going to say next. Paragraph 4. Creating health conscious adults. And that's going to be my subheading. Now the reason why I left this one till last is because it's not the best thing to talk about in terms of the ideas I could come up with. So generally you want to make sure that you start off with your strongest idea and then end with your weakest idea, because your first impression is just so important. So it is important creating health conscious adults, but I kind of felt a little bit limited on what we'd talk about here. So I really struggled with how to get the plan on. Okay, so the important thing with this one is that if you're not too sure about it, remember that a plan is not something you have to be stuck with. Okay, you don't have to have it just because you wrote it down in your plan. It might be that when I get to paragraph 4, I look back at my plan and I think, you know what, I've got a better idea now that I've started to get the ball rolling and get my ideas to actually generate. Maybe I want to go with something different for question 4, for paragraph 4, sorry. There's nothing wrong with that as well. The final one then, conclusion. Overall, I think we can all agree that the negative effects of eating junk food far outweigh the positives. It can feel fantastic and fun to have a treat once in a while, on the other hand. And again, I've just ended it by using the discourse marker there to suggest that this is obviously going to go a bit further. and I'm going to have my other side of the argument as well. Now what we're going to think about is really zooming in on the technical accuracy. This is a really important part of our writing and a really important component that will help you get higher marks in your exam. So look at the different forms of punctuation and just match them to the correct forms of definition. And all I want you to do is to think about which actual keywords matches with the definitions that appear in there on the right hand side. Now all of these forms of punctuation are considered more advanced or more sophisticated forms of punctuation, so being able to use these effectively in your writing will help you get a much higher mark for those 16 marks that are available for the technical accuracy. So if you'd like to pause the video now and to go through at your own pace, please feel free to do so. What I'm going to do is go ahead, I'm going to start matching up the correct answers with the correct forms of punctuation. So the first one then is a colon. So colon, this is used to precede a list of items, a quotation, or an expansion or an explanation. This is a really good thing to use in your introduction, and we're going to show you how you can use that a little bit later on in this video. The next one, parenthesis, this is also called brackets. The reason why a lot of people call it brackets is because it actually comes from the acronym BIDMAS or BODMAS that you might be aware of if you're studying for any form of maths qualification as well. In English, however, we call it parenthesis. So parenthesis is used to indicate extra or additional information in a sentence. Next one, a semicolon. So this is to indicate a pause, typically between two main clauses. This is more pronounced than the indicated by a comma, right? So it's basically where you'll use a semicolon to break up two really big ideas in a sentence. However, those ideas need to be linked, and therefore the semicolon allows us a slight pause, or still indicating that there's a link or some kind of relationship between the two separate ideas. And the final one, a dash. Now this one can be quite difficult to use. People often get it mixed up with a hyphen. A hyphen is where you use it to join up certain links between words, such as things like sister-in-law and things like that. However, a dash then is used to set off an idea within a sentence and may be used alone or in pairs. So as I said a moment ago, these are what we consider more advanced forms of punctuation, and if you're not too sure about how to use these, it's really important that you go away and you practice this a little bit more, because it's a real easy way just to get yourself a few extra marks in the exam. Now what I'd like to think about stretching and challenge your own understanding about punctuation, and think, what other forms of punctuation do you need to use? There is at least 12 different forms of punctuation that you can use, and if you're able to use a range of those in your response, then you're more likely to get a higher mark for your technical accuracy. Achieving a higher mark. So what I've done now is I've thought about 5 key steps that you can follow to help you when it comes to things like revision and practicing your question 5 response. So the first thing is about a plan. So create a plan that works for you, not just because you're told to make one. Now, a lot of the time people make a plan just because they're told to make a plan, but ultimately, if it's not going to be there to help you and assist you in your writing of your question 5, there's really no need to do it. So if you are going to do a plan, make sure it's one that works for you and will help you to improve your marks while you're doing your writing. Number 2, know what the examiner is looking for. Remember, you get 24 marks for content and 16 marks for technical accuracy, but what does that really mean? So when we're talking about the content and the organisation, which is what the 24 marks are for, we're talking about the kind of techniques that you're using to make your writing effective. When we're talking about the organisation, we're talking about, have you used different sentence structures, have you used paragraphs and things like that. Technical accuracy, again, we spoke about that a little bit more in the previous part of the video. There's all about whether you've used a range of different punctuation, sophisticated vocabulary that is spelt correctly, and also that there are no grammatical mistakes within your response. Step number 3. So write in the form of an article. So we absolutely 100% know that this year, 2022, you're going to have to write an article for your GCSE Paper 2 Question 5. So you need to make sure that you use headlines and subheadings, and this will really help you to organise your work as well, which again would feed into those 24 marks for the content and organisation. Number 4. Use a range of language and structural techniques. Remember that this question is about testing your ability to apply your understanding of all those English methods that you've been going over and over for the whole year, for the whole 2-3 years that you've been doing your GCSEs. So it's not just about, have you used some of the Forest techniques? What other ones can you use? What structural techniques can you use? Are you going to vary your sentences? Is there a point behind varying your sentences? Really got to think about what kind of methods can you employ to make your writing more effective. And the final one, read and review. So this is one that often gets overlooked, and really it's probably the most important one for me. So what you need to make sure you're doing is just reading through your work, you're going back over it, you're checking your spelling, your punctuation and your grammar. A key thing that people tend to miss out as well is you might have the real fantastic language techniques, some fantastic structural techniques, but you might have forgot or neglected to put in the appropriate paragraphs in there. So if you have done that, then that's absolutely fine, as long as you're able to go back, review it, and put 2 vertical lines in the margin to indicate where you want your paragraphs. If you don't spend time reviewing it, then it's an easy way to miss out on some marks. A good habit to get into as well is to leave a little bit of extra space at the end of your response, so that if you have reviewed it and you've identified any things that need to be changed or even improved upon, then you have the space available to do so. Comparing responses. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look back at the first response that we had earlier on in the video, and we're going to look at one that's had some time to make improvements and think a bit more about the technical accuracy and the kind of techniques that we need to use in order to make this response effective. So essentially you've got on the left hand side the first response that we had, and on the left hand side we've taken into account everything else that we've discussed in this video, along with the plan as well, detailing out what we're going to do for every single aspect of this question. So first thing you notice there is that I have used the exact same headline for this response. Again, your headline doesn't have to be particularly snappy or massively interesting. If you can make it that way, then that's absolutely fine. But really, we just want to make sure that you're using the right kind of features for an article. So it says then, junk food has a massive impact on all of us as a society. Parents today are facing more challenges, obstacles and adversity than ever before. Things like sweets and fast food can have a serious impact on our health, but is it having it once in a while really that bad? Let me get straight to the point. Parents are real life superheroes, but we need to be cautious about the vile, villainous effects of junk food on young people. Now, as I said earlier on in this video, we have to be very, very consciously aware of the audience, and the audience are going to be parents. So therefore, I'm going to make sure that I'm being very positive and that I'm going to tell them that I appreciate and value them. This is going to allow them to actually be on my side and be more receptive to the kind of ideas that I'm trying to put forth in my argument. The next part then. You can see there that just like the previous response as well, I've also used a subheading. It's a really good thing to use to help organise my response. So parenting is a full-time job. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to start thinking about still praising the audience, but also at the same time I'm going to start working in my other agenda, which is ultimately saying that junk food, fast food is not something that should be consumed by children necessarily, or at least not all the time. So it says then, you have presented with challenges, problems and serious issues on a daily basis. I am filled with respect and admiration for the effort you put in day after day. And what I'm going to do with this response, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say how it's understandable that you might have to give children junk food every now and again. And then I'm going to start building that up to my third paragraph, which is going to talk about the serious effects on their health. Now, if we compare these two responses, the first thing that should stand out to you is that this has used a lot more conscious punctuation. If we look at the first part, we can see that it has used an overly simplified statement of the issue. So junk food has a massive impact on all of us as a society. So this is a really good generic kind of statement to make about whatever topic that comes up, and this is simply stating that whatever it is I'm talking about, I'm telling my audience that I acknowledge that this is a serious issue or quite a complex thing to talk about. I've got a fantastic group of 3 here, saying parents are facing more challenges, obstacles and adversity than ever before. And I've also used things like my semicolon here, which is a fantastic thing to see, especially in terms of our technical accuracy. So things like sweets and fast food can have a serious impact on our health. I've used the semicolon here because it's separating my two clauses that I'm trying to make and helps break down this sentence, even though the two ideas are quite closely related. But it is having it once in a while really that bad. And I've also used my exclamation mark as well. Rhetorical question, sorry. Let me get straight to the point. Now this is a really good phrase to use just to show that I'm reaching the end of my introduction, and it allows me to use my colon. Now even if the point I'm trying to make is only 1 point, you can still use a colon to help drive that home. It's also telling the examiner that I understand the effect of a more wide range use of my punctuation. I'm not just using a full stop or a comma, I'm actually using more sophisticated forms of punctuation. Parents are real life superheroes, but we need to be cautious about the vile, villainous effects of junk food on young people. So I've got some obvious techniques there with vile and villainous, using my alliteration there, the repetition of the V letter in each of those words, but also I've created some really effective imagery as well. I've said that parents are superheroes, and I've made out that the villains, the bad things, the enemies, is the junk food that is affecting our young people. And you'll notice in the language that I've used, I'm not pointing the finger, I'm saying words like we, collective words that make us sound like we're all in this issue together, and it's a problem that needs to be solved by working together and communicating. You are presented with challenges, problems and serious issues on a daily basis. Again, I'm using a good group of 3 there just to get my initial point across. I am filled with respect and admiration. That's clearly buttering them up, making sure that they know that I acknowledge how difficult it is being a parent. And the effort you put in day after day, and that repetition of day after day really emphasizes that the speaker of this task really understands the kind of trials and tribulations that a parent goes through. Now, if you found this helpful or beneficial, then a real good thing to do is to use either of these responses to try and write one your own. Really try to practice this because, again, it's the biggest question that we're going to have for the language paper 2. So it's really important that you're able to practice it at any given opportunity. If you need any additional support or help, then new videos will be added every single week. Alternatively, please feel free to leave us a comment, like and subscribe, and we'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. Also, you can visit our partner channel, Bookworm Teaching, for more lessons and guidance on all things English. Thanks a lot, guys, and I hope you found this useful. I'll also include a link in the description which will take you to a full lesson that takes you through not only question 5 but also question 4 as well. Thank you guys, and all the best with all your revision in the future. Thank you.